Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today in Prague in the Czech Republic at the VHU, the Military History Institute, where we're taking a look at some particularly cool prototype Czech firearms. And today we are looking at Project KRASA. This was one of a series of experimental rifles developed with the intention of making a PDW or compact submachine gun specifically for like unit commanders and specialty troops, paratroops, special forces, that sort of thing, armored vehicle crews, that sort of thing. Now, this project starts in the Czech Republic in 1976. And their first go at this project is to take a VC-58, the standard infantry rifle, and just make it very, very compact. This was experimental rifle E. They had a series of various experimental rifles that were identified by letter designation. E was the attempt to make a VC-58 as short as possible. And it wasn't really going to work with the VC-58 operating system. So fundamentally, they were going for a gun, the goal was to have a gun that would be substantially shorter and lighter than anything else that had ever been produced in our standard infantry rifle cartridge. So the concept here was not to use a pistol cartridge, it was to use the regular 7.62 by 39mm cartridge. Essentially, this is the equivalent, the counterpart to an AKS-47U, the Krinkov. But they wanted a gun, like the original goal was 1.6 kilograms or 3.5 pounds total weight of the gun, which is tiny. They wanted it less than a foot long in the most compact mode, so with the stock folded. Now, they never quite achieved that, and they definitely didn't get it with a shrunk down or a shortened VZ-58. And so what happens is, by the way, that shortened VZ-58 is developed in about 1978. They continue working on new designs. The guy behind the project was Jiri Čermák, who was the designer of the VZ-58. And he put together KRASA here in 1980. Concept starts in 1980. By 1981, they have made 2 developmental models, one of them fully functional. This is the one fully functional example. And it is absolutely tiny. So it weighs in at 4.6 pounds, 7.62 by 39 full power cartridge, well, full intermediate power cartridge. This has a 5.4 inch long barrel. It's 12.4 inches overall. It's like 315 millimeters overall length with the stock folded. The thing is absolutely tiny. And the way they managed to do that was by completely changing the operating mechanism so that instead of pushing cartridges forward out of the magazine, this actually pulls them backwards out of the magazine. It is one of only a couple firearms designs ever developed that do this. The other 3 that I can point you to, in fact I have videos on all 3 of these. One is the Mars pistol, the oldest is the Mars pistol, British. Frankly, the Mars pistol I think is bigger and heavier than this intermediate caliber PDW. Then the Boberg pistols, which are now being made by Bond Arms, a compact version of gun that does the same thing. The Boberg is really the closest analog to this because they're both using this rearward cartridge feed system in order to make the gun as compact as possible. Essentially what it means is the barrel can sit here, literally overlapping the magazine, because cartridges, in a normal system, the cartridge has to go from the magazine forward into the barrel, and so the barrel can't start until the end of the magazine. On this, the cartridge is being pulled backwards, and so when it's chambered, it's being chambered from a position back here, so the barrel can actually be located backwards behind, well, overlapping the magazine. Anyway, the Boberg pistol does this, and then the North Koreans, at about the same time as this was happening, in fact a little bit earlier, developed their own version of the PK machine gun that could feed from either a belt or a magazine, and the magazine used a system very much like this. So I'll have links to all 3 of those different guns in the description text below if you want to see some other takes on this rear feeding concept. But back to KRASA here. By setting, like, this is the one functional example of the gun. Now, they didn't do a whole lot of shooting with it. They put like about a magazine worth of ammunition through this. They tested it with some proof rounds to make sure it was functional and make sure it was safe. They ran a handful of regular cartridges through it to find muzzle velocity, which, by the way, the average muzzle velocity with this little tiny barrel was 535 meters per second or 1,755 feet per second with standard M43 ball ammunition. So I know you're probably eager to see how this thing actually works. So let's dive right in, pull it apart, and take a look. All right, so here's the gun folded. Like I said, this is 12.4 inches. For a size comparison, like here's a Tokarev pistol. This thing is legitimately tiny. And perhaps even more interesting to me, the stock is long enough that you actually have a nice, comfortable length of pull to get a decent cheek weld with the stock extended. Normally guns that are this small, something like the VZ61 Scorpion, have stocks that are just not really long enough to be functional. This actually feels pretty good in the hand, which is really remarkable. Now, the markings on here are SA81 6955. SA is short for Samopal, that's submachine gun. 81 is the date of manufacture. And then this is the serial number. Czech experimental weapons from this period had essentially quasi-random 4-digit serial numbers. They were sort of sequential, but like no one's been able to identify a specific meaning to any of these numbers. So this has nothing, like they only made 2 of these guns. There's really no significance in that particular serial number. Anyway, we then have a selector here, semi-auto, safe, and full auto. There's your selector switch on the side. We have a rather M16 inspired magazine catch. Push that in, you can pull out the magazine. This is not an AK magazine. First off, it holds 20 rounds. It's also, I suppose more importantly, not a VZ58 magazine because it feeds cartridges backwards. So to load this, this is a dummy round, by the way. And to load it, what we have to do is push this in, follow her down, and that is loaded in position. And there's another one. So it is a 20-round double stack, but single feed magazine, and that's important because the feed system has to grab the cartridge and pull it out backwards. So you can't really have the alternating feed system of a typical rifle magazine because this is a fairly complex operation. You're not just pushing around forward, so the round has to be in the same position every time to be pulled backwards out of the mag. The sights are not super important at this stage in a gun's development, but we've got a front protected blade, and we've got a rear notch sight, adjustable for elevation there, and adjustable for windage. That is the charging handle. Obviously that's the ejection port, and there's a cool system set up where the ejection port simply opens when the bolt is rearward. So when the cartridge or when the empty case needs to be ejected, that's when the dust cover automatically opens and then closes behind. Now to disassemble this, we're going to start with a tab at the back here, very much like a Kalashnikov. Just push that in and we can lift up the top cover. It's spring-loaded, so it'll stay up like that. We can then push this forward again, quite AK-like. That's the recoil spring. And then the bolt and bolt carrier just lift right out. The gas piston at the front here is articulated, and that's literally just for disassembly. So it can go into the gas tube there, bring it forward enough to fit this down into the gun. Inside here, we have 2 components. We have the bolt and the bolt carrier. So there we go. We can pull the bolt itself out. A couple things to note here. These are the locking surfaces. So these are the locking lugs on the bolt. Firing pin, extractor, of course, and the firing pin is floating here. This one doesn't have a spring. I don't know, probably would have if it had gone into production. And then we have these 2 cammed surfaces right there, and this hook in the back. And those are what bring the bolt in and out of the locked position. So on the bolt carrier, we have, first off, the extractor. Well, they're not extractors. They're like the magazine feed claws. So these, when the bolt goes forward, these actually snap around a cartridge. They're going to push into position like that. They grab the cartridge, and then when the bolt cycles, when it fires, or when you manually cycle the bolt, this pulls the cartridge backwards out of the magazine. Now we'll get to what brings it up, like where it goes from this. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let me put the bolt back in here. The bolt slides in there, and then we've got an angled hook on the inside here. This is the unlocked traveling position. And then when this is feeding a cartridge up there in the bolt, it's going to feed it into the chamber. When this hits the chamber, the bolt's going to stop, but the recoil spring is going to continue pushing the bolt carrier forward, which is going to drop the bolt down, push it backward, and then the locking lugs right here engage with locking recesses in the receiver. When it fires, gas pressure here is going to push the carrier back, which pushes it like this until these angled surfaces meet up. They're going to push the bolt up, which unlocks it and then allows the whole thing to travel backwards. You can see there's a cutout in the side of the bolt right here, and that's where the ejector is going to come in and kick the round, the empty case, out that way and out of the gun. All right, now before I show you the gun, I'm actually going to take the handguards off as well, because it's rather interesting to see what's under there. This furniture, by the way, is made of a material called Pertinax, which is essentially, it's a like cloth textile soaked in resin and then put under high temperature and pressure to sort of bake it into, not a plastic so much, it's not Bakelite, it's like resin impregnated textile fiber. I don't think this is a material that would be used in final mass production, but it was something that they did for these prototypes. So first off, when I take the handguards off, you can see there is actually no gas tube in here at all. The gas piston is actually guided by the cutouts on the inside of the handguard here. Again, probably something that would change in mass production. That's gonna go, there we go, that's all the way forward. We have a very short barrel, of course, and then there's an angled gas port in here that runs from basically the end of the barrel here up into the gas block there. The muzzle here, this muzzle device is actually a big cone, which is probably done to try to redirect blast and keep this a little bit less totally deafening and reduce flash to whatever extent is vaguely possible, I suppose. It's a little hard to see, but there is a gas port right down in the bottom of that gas block. There you go. There, you can just barely see it. And then, interestingly, there's a gas vent in the front of the gas block here that isn't, like, it's open at all times. So the moment that this fires, gas pressure is actually pushing the piston back and simultaneously venting out the front, which is really kind of a bit unusual. Remember, this is one of two guns made. It's the first fully functional prototype. I'm sure they were still in the process of trying to fine-tune the gas system to make this run reliably. And obviously this got nowhere even close to endurance trials or harsh environment trials. We have one screw up inside the pistol grip. I'm going to go ahead and take that off as well to give you the best possible view of the working parts. There we go. Pistol grip, integrated trigger guard. And then there is the underside. This is the block that holds the pistol grip assembly. You can see that the overall construction here is basically two flat plates on the sides with various other bits riveted in. So we have a rear trunnion block here with the folding stock riveted in place. We have our front trunnion with the top cover riveted in place. We've got rivets for this guy. And then there's an internal sheet, like a C-channel shaped piece that's going to hold a lot of the fire control parts in position. So when we put the magazine in, again, dummy cartridges, it sits there, which is really like bizarre by normal standards. Like this can't possibly work. How does it go forward? Well, right down under my finger there, you can see the base of the cartridge and just a little bit of the primer. That's where the magazine presents cartridges. So this claw, when the bolt goes all the way forward to approximately this position, you can see that this claw is lined up with the back of the magazine. And when I snap that, all the way forward, that last click was the feed clamps snapping over the round in the magazine. When I start to pull that back, you will actually see the tip of the bullet there start to retract backwards. There it goes. There we go with the magazine out. You can see it in there. And it's going to proceed backwards, like so. And there just aren't a lot of good viewing angles inside this gun. But it's going to come all the way back. There we go. Now it is presented, ready to go into the chamber. And when the bolt goes back forward, nose of the round hits the feed ramp there. And snaps into the chamber, ready to fire. Once you fire, my extractor is not working well, so it's still in the barrel. But once you fire, it's going to get ejected out the side. Now this is a hammer-fired gun, and this guy right here has a cool multi-function role. It acts as both the ramp that lifts the cartridge out of the claw up in line with the barrel, and it's the hammer. So if I dry fire this, you can see that hammer snaps forward, fires the round, and then it's going to be reset, of course, when we cycle the action. So I apologize again that this is so difficult to show you the inside of, but we have two rails in here. We have one right there and one on the opposite side. And those essentially are the back end of the feed system. So when the round comes out of the magazine, it's going to get positioned in between these two rails, backed up all the way to the end of those two rails and held upward by spring tension from the hammer. And one of the neat features about the gun is that I can bring the bolt all the way back, have the round pulled back all the way into position ready to feed, and then I can just take the bolt and carrier out, and you can see the round in that sort of half-fed position. You can see that it's backed all the way up in these two rails. It's under spring tension here. And then when I put the bolt back in and push it forward, it's going to push up just like that into the chamber. So that is the backward feed system of the KRASA. And by the way, in case you were wondering how this dust cover works, there is this little lever right here. When it pushes down, it's got a little hook right here that's going to push the dust cover open, and this is also actuated by the bolt carrier going back and forth. So small parts, a little bit fiddly, but a really cool space-efficient solution. While we're in there, this guy right here is the fixed ejector, and that's pretty much all of the internal parts. These top rails are just there for the bolt carrier to run on, chamber, and well, and no gas tube on it. So this particular example, manufactured in 1981, they do some testing, but they don't do any further development on it, because at this point, the Czechs managed to find themselves a round of 5.45 by 39. That's the hot new cartridge. It's the new AK-74 cartridge, and all of the Czech official attempts to get examples of this cartridge to work with from the Soviet Union, they'd all gone nowhere. The Soviets weren't willing to hand out the technical package for this new cartridge. And so the Czechs kept working with the original cartridge until, I think literally the way they got their hands on the first cartridge was a Czech weapons designer happened to be in the forest where there happened to have been a Soviet deployment of troops in eastern Czechoslovakia, and literally found a cartridge on the ground in a military area. And like, oh, what's that? You know, runs back home, brings it into work, and it's like, we have a cartridge. We can start working on this chambering, you know, copy this cartridge and work on it ourselves. And so development of this version of the gun stops, and they switch over to working with the new 545 cartridge. In 1983, they put together one functional example of the Krása in 545x39, but then that also gets canceled. By the end of 1983, same year that one example is made, the whole program is canceled because now focus has shifted to Project Lada. Lada was the intent to make a 545, essentially a full weapons family, where you had the PDW and the rifle and the light machine gun, and probably a designated marksman's rifle as well. I actually have some videos on Project Lada. Project Lada then also fails because the Soviet Union collapses. The whole communist order collapses throughout Europe. And Project Lada transitions into the CZ-2000 in 556, which then itself comes apart. And anyway, this is the beginning of a whole series of projects that don't end up going into full development. But this is, to my mind, absolutely mind-bogglingly, fantastically cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed getting this look at Krása. I'd like to give a very big thanks to the VHU, the Czech Military Historical Institute, for giving me access to this to take a look at, in addition to their fantastic, basically military technical reference collection. They also have a really nice public Army museum here in Prague. So if you're in town, definitely set aside at least half a day to go through the museum. They have not just the sort of typical military history exhibits you would expect, but also quite a lot of Czech prototype firearms up and on display to the public. So definitely worth some time. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.